You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's weird to think about, but Ole Miss probably needs to be more of a finished product after the Georgia State game than they were a year ago, whenever they had Jackson Dart and Walter Nolan and all those upperclassmen. You need to be further along in September this time than you were last year. Last year, there was 4 preseason games. I think it was Furman, Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern, and then Wake Forest, who immediately canceled next year because we don't even play the same sport as them. And in that game against Wake Forest, you didn't really see us playing the same sport as them. But it is what it is. Ole Miss needs to be a finished product, or more of a finished product, because football is an evolutionary game. And it goes up and it goes down. It goes up and it goes down. And it's all about ebbs and flows. So you're never a finished product. Whenever you come close, you end up with the last 3 or 4 games of the 2008 season. That's what that can look like. But Ole Miss opens up against Georgia State, which isn't Furman like an FCS team a year ago. Georgia State beat Vanderbilt a year ago. Georgia State has gone into Rocky Top and Tennessee and beat them as well. Ole Miss is a 38-ish point favorite in that game. And coming out of it, you have Kentucky. You have Arkansas. 2 games that can get weird, and 2 games that you have to look at a different way because of what happened a year ago. For starters, Kentucky is a team that beat you a year ago. So you're going to probably put a decent amount of effort into that game because you got beat a year ago. Then you have Arkansas, who is definitely going to be coming into Vaught-Hemingway Stadium with a fair amount of vinegar in their system, ready for a fight. You put 63 points on them in Fayetteville, and it could have been a lot more. Let's just say that they are going to be ready for that game, especially with the transfers like Jalen Braxton and Patrick Kudus and Luke Haas, those players in Oxford. That game probably takes on a little bit of added meaning. Then you have Tulane, who is probably one of the better G5 teams in all of the country. And for good measure, in September, you have LSU. That is why after this Georgia State game, you have to be fairly close so that when you take that game 1 to game 2 jump, you kind of take a big jump. And I think that Ole Miss can do that. I think that Austin Simmons can do that. Lane Kiffin at his press conference today said that Austin doesn't need to be chasing stats. He just needs to be executing the offense. And if you do that, you're going to be in pretty good shape. And the way they do progressions and all of that is just a little bit different. But Jackson Dart and Austin Simmons, they are different style quarterbacks at heart. They run the same offense, essentially, but it's going to look completely different. If Austin is just Austin, Ole Miss has a chance to be pretty good. I want to see how the offensive line looks, and we'll talk more about the offensive line and the tight end in the next segment. But as it sits right now, I am curious to see if Ole Miss is going to be able to run the ball and how they do it. I talked with Dalen Flowers, and I talked with Brian Smith, the Florida football scout, the Locked On recruiting expert. Trinidad Chambliss and Austin Simmons in the backfield at the same time feels like something that they might do eventually. It feels like there's some creativity there with what goes on, especially with the running ability of Chambliss. Damian Taylor has been the goal line back for a good bit of spring camp or fall camp. Damian Taylor is probably the number 2 running back right now, behind Kejuan Lacey and ahead of Logan Diggs. For, take that for what it's worth. But this running back room, very thoughtfully put together with the way and the styles of those running backs, so that you don't have a situation like Henry Parrish and eventually Ulysses Bentley last year. This is very thoughtfully put together in the running back room, and they're hoping potentially for 2020, 2021, 2022 type situation in the running back room, but it's going to be on that offensive line to handle what's going on. And we're going to talk about the injuries in the O-line room and in the tight end room in the next segment. With Lane Kiffin wanting to run the ball more, those injuries and all that become pretty paramount to what's going on. But this football team needs to be a finished product after the Georgia State game. Now, not finished product is what I'm saying, but it needs to be pretty well put together. You shouldn't be growing in week 6 anymore. This kind of, you're in the fire. You're ready to be serious. There's no room for mistake, because the reality of it is Ole Miss fans want to make the playoff. They do. And if they say they don't, they're lying to you. They do. But to get to the playoffs, it will require probably a 6-0 record for Ole Miss this season going into Athens. If you are 6-0 going into Athens, all of a sudden we start having a completely different conversation. Because at that point, if you're 6-0 going into Athens, you only have to go 4-2 the remainder of the week. Now, the Georgia game going to be really tough. At Oklahoma, going to be a really tough game as well. And then you have South Carolina and Florida. I don't know exactly what that look like. But on the other side, you have Mississippi State and the Citadel. So as long as you handle what was going on, and last year they lost games as double-digit favorites, I'm quite aware of that. But the way it's situated, Ole Miss can make a run, but they need to be 6-0 at the turn after Washington State. And that requires them to be much more ahead of the game following Georgia State than to be just trying to figure stuff out. This Georgia State game is a pretty important game because of what comes after it. It gets real in a hurry. At Kentucky, Arkansas at home, Tulane at home, LSU at home, Washington State comes to town, at Georgia, at Oklahoma, at South Carolina at home. So we'll see exactly what that looks like. I'm pretty fired up about where Ole Miss can be, but they need to be 6-0 going to that Georgia game. You have to be on your P's and Q's and ahead of the game after this Georgia State game. That is going to be massively important. Austin Simmons needs to be ahead of where we expect him to be. There needs to be a running back. I want to see Ole Miss running the ball on 3rd and 3 and getting first downs when the other team knows it's coming. That's what I want to see, especially against a Georgia State. If that happens, Ole Miss is going to be absolutely fine. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. In our final segment, Lane Kiffin admitted one of his main goals, improving the run game. It's been set back a bit by injuries to the offensive line and tight end, but the offensive line starting to get a little bit healthy. So where does Ole Miss stand right now, and just how good can this team be? We'll break all of that down next. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we are the front door of Ole Miss. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show, and it's totally free. Your support means the world to us. For your second listen, check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes around college football's landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I apologize about the trivia. I told you about the Alvin and the Chipmunk stuff. The day just kind of got away with us. So bear with us on that. We'll have trivia coming back tomorrow. Hotty toddy, everybody. Remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you later.